Hello, my fabulous dream chasers, and welcome back to my channel. Did I say dream chasers? I meant dream chasers. I'm not sure. Okay, so we are back with another installment of Nancy Drew, The Secret of the Old Clock. Last time I read chapters 3 and 4, now we are going to do chapter 5 and 6. And just to experiment how well I do reading aloud with music playing, that's what I'm going to be doing. So I have my Bluetooth earbuds in with some music playing, and we're going to read. I can still hear myself because I turned the volume down just enough so I can hear me. Alright, here we go. Chapter 5, A Surprising Story. Nancy froze behind the wheel. Had she inadvertently hit someone? Her heart pounding in fright, she opened the car door to step out. At the same instant, a shadowy figure arose from a pile of hay near her. "I guess I must have scared you silly when I screamed," said a girl of Nancy's age, stepping forward. You're all right?" Nancy gasped. "Yes, and I'm sorry I yelled. I came out here to check on our supply of feed for the chickens. I didn't think it was going to be a bad storm, so I didn't bother to go back to the house." "It's pretty bad," said Nancy. Sorry, my friend just tried to call me. "It's pretty bad," said Nancy. "Well, the storm terrified me." The girl continued. "I didn't hear your car coming, and when it rushed in here, I panicked." Nancy began to breathe normally again, then told the stranger her name and the fact that the mechanism for raising the top of the convertible was not working. "What a shame," said the girl. "And you must get your clothes dried. The storm is letting up. Let's dash over to the house. Grace will help you too." "Aw, that's cool." "She's my sister." "My name's Allison Hoover." Hoover! Nancy was tempted to tell Allison that she had been planning to call, but she decided not to mention it at the moment. It might be better to do her sleuthing more suitably. No, not suitably. Subtly. Yeah, that sounds right. Okay. Nancy smiled at Allison. "Thanks a million, but first I'd like to wipe out the car. Are there any rags around the barn?" Allison produced several, and together the two girls mopped the water from the cushions and floor. By this time the rain had stopped. As Nancy and Allison sloshed through a series of puddles to the farmhouse, Nancy had a better chance to study her companion. She was tall, with reddish blonde hair and very fair skin. Her voice was musical, and she had an attractive, lilting laugh. That must be an old word, because I've never heard that before. The run-down farmhouse and stamped the mud from their shoes on the back porch. Then Allison flung open the door, and they entered a cheerful kitchen. As the door shut behind them, another girl who was just closing the oven of an old-fashioned range turned toward them in surprise. "Grace, I've brought a visitor," Allison said, quickly. "Nancy, I want you to meet my sister. She's the mainstay of our family of two." Grace Hoover cordially acknowledged the introduction and greeted Nancy with a warm smile. Nancy judged her to be at least 4 years older than Allison. Her face was rather serious, and it was evident from her manner that responsibility had fallen on her shoulders at an early age. Nancy was attracted to both girls and responded to their friendly welcome. She put on a robe which Allison brought her, and Grace hung her wet clothes near the range. Presently, Grace pulled an ironing board from a closet with the intention of pressing Nancy's garments. But Nancy would not hear of this and began to iron them herself. "This is fun," she said to the sisters. "I don't know what I would have done without you girls." "It's great for us," Allison spoke up. "We don't have much company. To tell you the truth, we can't afford it." Grace stepped to the stove, removed a golden brown cake from the oven, and set it on the table to cool. "But today, we're not talking about money. It's Allison's birthday, and this is a birthday cake. Nancy, if you're not in too much of a hurry, I wish you'd join us in a little celebration." "Why, I'd love to," Nancy said. "Grace's cakes are yummy," Allison declared. "I'm not much of a cook myself. My department is taking care of the barn and the chickens." Okay. Soon, Nancy finished pressing her clothes and put them back on. Meanwhile, the cake had cooled, and Grace started to spread the chocolate frosting. "Suppose you two go into the living room and wait," she suggested. "I'll bring in the cake and tea." Nancy followed Allison to the adjoining room. Although it was comfortable, the room did not contain much furniture. The floor had been painted and was scantily covered with handmade rag rugs. With the exception of an old-fashioned sofa, an inexpensive table, a few straight-backed chairs, and an old oil stove, which furnished heat in the cold weather, there was little else in the room. However, dainty white curtains covered the windows, and Nancy realized that although the Hoovers were poor, they had tried hard to make their home attractive. "Do you two girls live here all alone?" "Do you two girls live here alone all the time?" Nancy inquired. Allison nodded. "Grace and I have been living here since Father died. That was 2 years ago. Mother passed away just before that," the girl added with a slight catch in her voice. "Their illnesses took every penny we had." "I'm terribly sorry," Nancy remarked sympathetically. "It must be dreadfully hard for 2 girls to run the farm by themselves." "Our farm isn't as large as it once was," Allison said quietly. "We have only a few acres left. I know you are too polite to ask how we manage, Nancy. Grace helps a dressmaker at Masonville whenever she can get work. She makes all her own clothes, and mine too. And I raise chickens." From just beyond the doorway suddenly came the strains of "Happy Birthday to You, Happy Birthday." By this time, Nancy had joined in. She and Grace finished. "Day to you, happy birthday, dear Allison. Happy birthday to you." Grace set the cake with 18 candles lighted on the table. She and Nancy sang the second verse with the words, "May you have many more." I thought it was "and many more." Tears stood in Allison's eyes. When the song ended, she grasped her sister in a tremendous hug. Then she gave Nancy one. This is the nicest birthday I've had in years," she quavered. "And it's one of the most enjoyable I've ever attended," Nancy said sincerely. Suddenly, Allison began to sing a tuneful old English ballad about the birthday of a village lass. Nancy listened entranced to Allison's clear, bell-like tones. When she finished, Nancy applauded, then said, "That was perfectly lovely." Sorry, I need some water. That was perfectly lovely. You have a beautiful voice, Allison. The singer laughed gaily. Thank you, Nancy. I've always wanted to take lessons, but as you know, voice training is pretty expensive. At that moment, Grace brought in a tray of fragrant tea. As she poured 3 cups, Allison blew out the candles and served the cake. I've never tasted anything more delicious in all my life, Nancy said enthusiastically. The 3 girls chatted like old friends. Finally, the sun broke through the clouds. As Nancy rose to leave, she noticed an unusual picture on the wall opposite her and commented on its beauty. Uncle Josiah Crowley gave it to us, Allison told her. If he were only alive now, things would be different. At the mention of the name, Nancy sat down again. Was she going to pick up a clue to the possibility that Mr. Crowley had made a later will? He wasn't really our uncle, Grace explained, but we loved him as much as though he were a relative. Her voice broke, and for a moment she could not go on. Then, gaining control of herself, she continued. He lived on the farm next to us. That was when Mother and Father were alive. All of Allison's and my misfortunes seemed to come at once. He was the dearest man you ever saw, Allison added. Some people thought him queer, but you never minded his peculiar ways after you knew him. Uncle Josiah was very good to us. He always told me that he'd back me in a singing career. Yes, Grace added. Uncle Josiah used to say Allison sang as sweetly as a bird, and he wanted to pay for lessons with a famous teacher. But after he went to live with the Tophams, he never said any more about it. He never liked it with the Tophams, though, Allison declared. They weren't kind to him, and he used to slip away to visit us. Uncle Josiah often said that we seemed like his own children, Grace spoke up. Excuse me. He brought us many nice gifts, but we loved him for himself and not his money. I remember, though, the very last day we saw him alive, he told us, I had planned a big surprise to make you girls happy, but I can't tell you now what it is. You'll see it in my will. Those were his very words. And then the Tophams got everything, Allison said. He must have changed his mind for some reason. It's hard to believe that he would forget his promise to us, Grace said sadly. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if a later will could be found? Allison exclaimed. Yes, Nancy replied slowly. I've heard that Mr. Crowley told other people he was leaving money to them. The Turner sisters, for instance. Do you know them? Slightly, Grace answered. My dad, Nancy went on, is a lawyer, and he and I are very much interested in this case. He even mentioned you girls, and to tell the truth, I was on my way here to talk to you. Allison impulsively grasped Nancy's arm. You say your father is a lawyer? Grace and I are positive Uncle Josiah made a later will. Oh, if we could only engage your father to help us prove this. Then a sad look came over her face. But I'm forgetting. We wouldn't have any money to pay him if we should lose the case. Don't let that worry you, Nancy said kindly. This is your birthday, and you must be happy, Allison. My special wish for you is that before you're 1 year older, you'll inherit some of the Crowley money, so that you can take those singing lessons. Boy, I wish I would get singing lessons. Okay. Chapter 6, An Exciting Appointment. The Hoover girls walked out to the barn with Nancy. Do come to see us again, Grace called, as the young detective climbed into her car. Yes, please do, Allison added. Nancy promised that she would. As soon as I have some news, she said. Although the weather had cleared, the river road remained muddy and slippery. Nancy found it necessary to drive with extreme care for the next 2 miles until she reached the main highway. No wonder this river road isn't used much, she thought. And how do Grace and Allison get to town? Nancy wondered. She had not seen a car at the Hoover home and knew that no bus passed their door. I certainly wish, she thought, that I or somebody else could locate a later will of Josiah Crowley's by which the Hoovers and the Turners would receive some much-needed money. I must tell Dad about this latest development. She decided to see if her father was in his office and drove directly there. Nancy parked the car in a nearby lot. She surveyed the She surveyed the convertible ruefully as she climbed out. Poor thing, it certainly needs a bath. Nancy found Mr. Drew in. As she entered his private office, he arose from the desk chair to kiss her. I'm glad you're here and safe, the lawyer said. I was worried about you when that violent storm came up. When Hannah phoned me that you weren't back, I began to regret I'd sent you on this errand. His daughter grinned. I'm back all in one piece. I delivered the papers to Judge Hart and learned that he and his wife saw Mr. Crowley in Masonville a couple of times. Also, I talked to the Hoover girls. She described her meeting with Allison and Grace Hoover and ended by asking her father if he could help them. From what you say, it does look as though Josiah Crowley might have made another will, which included them as beneficiaries, Mr. Drew commented thoughtfully. I'll be glad to do anything I can to help the Hoover girls. He asked whether the sisters had given Nancy any specific information about Mr. Crowley's habits or other helpful clues. When Nancy shook her head, Mr. Drew suggested that she invite the girls to his office for a little conference. Perhaps if I ask them some questions, it will recall helpful incidents. The lawyer studied his desk calendar for a moment, then looked up at his daughter. How about tomorrow afternoon at 2:45? I can give them about half an hour. For answer, Nancy gave her father a hug and then asked if she might use his telephone to call the Hoovers at once. Grace and Allison eagerly accepted the Drews' invitation, and Nancy said she would drive out to bring them to the conference, and then take them home afterward. You're a doll, cried Allison, who had answered the telephone. Nancy, I just know you're going to solve this mystery. Suddenly, an idea came to Nancy. She asked Allison how long the girls would be able to stay in River Heights. Oh, as long as you need us, Allison replied. Good. Then I'd like you both to stay and have supper with us, Nancy said. Sorry, I can't join you, Mr. Drew told his daughter as she hung up. I have a dinner engagement and conference in the evening. Just then, the mayor of River Heights was shown into the lawyer's office, and Nancy arose to leave. She spoke to the mayor for a moment, then said, See you later, Dad. Before Nancy returned home, she stopped at an old-fashioned house on a side street. It was the home of Signor Mascagni. Signor Mascagni. What a name! I'm just going to call him Signor. A famous voice teacher who had retired to the small city the year before, but took a few outstanding pupils. Nancy introduced herself to the white, bushy-haired, florid-faced man, then said, Signor, would you be willing to listen to the voice of a friend of mine and give your honest opinion as to whether or not she might become a great singer? If she might, and she can obtain the money for lessons, would you be able to take her as a pupil? Signor studied Nancy for several minutes before replying. Finally, he said, You do not look like the kind of girl who would come here on a foolish errand. Ordinarily, I do not accept beginners, but in this case, I would be willing to hear your friend sing." He laughed. "Mind you, I will give you nothing but the truth, and if your friend does not measure up, I hope her feelings will not be hurt too deeply." Nancy laughed too. "I like honesty," she said. "As a matter of fact, this girl knows nothing about what I am asking you. Coming here will be a complete surprise for her. I'm probably no judge of voices, but I think she's a natural. However, we will both appreciate having your opinion and will certainly abide by it." She arranged for a meeting the following afternoon at 4 o'clock and left Signor's house in an excited mood. "Maybe I'm going out on a limb," Nancy mused, "but this is another one of those hunches of mine that Dad talks about, and I must carry through." When she picked up the Hoovers the following day, Nancy did not mention the appointment with the voice teacher. The three girls went directly to Mr. Drew's office, and at once he began to quiz Grace and Allison about Mr. Crowley. "I understand that he was a rather eccentric man," the lawyer began. "Suppose you tell me everything you can remember about what Josiah Crowley did and what he said, which would help us figure out where he might have secreted a later will." "Uncle Josiah was rather absent-minded," Grace spoke up. "I often saw him hunting for his spectacles, which he had pushed up on his head." "Did he ever hide things?" Mr. Drew asked. "Oh, yes," Allison laughed. "Uncle Josiah was always putting articles away in what he called a safe place. But the places were so safe he never could find the things again." "Then," Nancy spoke up excitedly, "Mr. Crowley could have hidden a will and then forgotten where?" "I suppose so," Grace replied. "While living with the Tophams, I'm sure that's just what he would have done. One day when he was calling at our house, he talked about the Tophams and the way they were trying to get all of his money. I guess they think, just because I stay on, that they're going to get everything, but they'll be fooled when they find I've made another will," he said with that odd little chuckle of his. "This time, I'm not going to trust it to any lawyer. I'll put it away in a safe place that I know will be safe." Allison asked Mr. Drew, Do you think Uncle Josiah hid another will somewhere in the Topham's house?" The lawyer looked down at his desk for several seconds before replying. "If he did, we would have a great fight on our hands, I'm afraid, trying to persuade the Tophams to let us make a search." Another thought had come to Nancy, and she shuddered at the idea. Perhaps the Tophams had been altered by all the talk of a later will. Had searched for it, discovered one, and by now destroyed it. Sorry, I lost my place for a second. I skipped ahead a bit. She flashed her father a questioning look and got the impression that he had the same thought. But there was no point in discouraging the Hoover girls by telling them this. Mr. Drew continued to question the sisters until 3:30, then said he had another appointment. He would do all he could to help the girls, and would not charge them for his services. "Unless they bring results," he added with a smile. "You're very kind, just like your daughter," said Grace as she arose and shook hands with the lawyer. "You have no idea how much Allison and I appreciate what you're doing for us." When the three girls reached Nancy's car, she told the sisters she wanted them to meet someone special in town and drove directly to Signor's home. As they went up to the front porch, they could hear the sounds of a soprano voice singing an aria from Tosca. "How beautiful!" Allison exclaimed softly. The girls were admitted by a maid and asked to wait in a small room while Signor's pupil finished her lesson. Puzzled, Allison waited for Nancy to explain. "I have a surprise for you," Nancy said with a grin. "Signor has promised to listen to your voice. If you pass the test, he'll consider taking you as a pupil. That is, after we find the money for voice lessons." Allison was too dumbfounded to speak, but Grace cried out, "Oh, Nancy, what are you going to do next? We've known you only 24 hours, and you've already boosted our moral sky high." At this moment, the door to the studio opened. The young soprano came out, followed by Signor. He said goodbye to his pupil, then invited the three callers into the studio. Nancy quickly introduced the Hoover sisters. "And you are the singer?" the man said almost at once, addressing Allison. "I can tell from your speaking voice." Apparently, the teacher sensed that Allison had been taken by surprise and was a little nervous. Accordingly, he began to talk on other subjects than music. He showed the girls several paintings in the room and pieces of statuary which had come from Italy. "I prize them highly," he said. "They're exquisite," Allison remarked. Signor walked to a rear window and pointed out a lovely garden in back of the house. Then, evidently satisfied that Allison was at ease, he led the way to the grand piano and sat down. "Now, what would you like to sing?" he asked Allison with a smile. "Please stand right here, facing me." "Something very simple," she replied. "America the Beautiful?" The teacher nodded, asked her what key she would like it to be played in, then began to accompany her. Allison sang as though inspired. Her voice sounded even more beautiful than it had at the farmhouse, Nancy thought. When Allison finished the song, Signor made no comment. Instead, he asked her to try a scale, then to sing single tones, jumping from octave to octave. "You have a very fine range, Miss Hoover," was his only comment. For half an hour, he had Allison try short songs in various keys, and at one point joined with her in a duet. At last, he turned around on the piano bench and faced Nancy and Grace. "I believe," he said slowly, "I believe that someday we shall know Allison Hoover as an operatic star." Before the girls could say anything, he jumped up and turned to shake Allison's hand fervently. By this time, the full import of his words had dawned on the young singer. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Bravissimo, bravissimo," he exclaimed. "You sing, you cry, you smile, magnifico. You will also be a dramatic actress, splendida." Nancy and Grace were nearly on the verge of tears also. They were so overwhelmed by the happy news. Then suddenly the three girls became serious. Remember that there was still the problem of money for lessons from this great man. They knew his fee per hour must be very high. Allison suddenly began to talk and poured out her whole story to the white-haired teacher. "But I know," she declared with a brave smile, "that somehow I'm going to get the money for the lessons, and I wouldn't want to take them from anybody but you, Signor. I'll come back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very, very much. Please, girls, I'd like to leave now." As Allison rushed towards the front door, Signor detained Nancy and Grace. "This Allison, she is wonderful," he exclaimed. I want to give her lessons to see that her training is correct. He threw up his hands and shook his head. But I cannot afford to give the lessons free. Perhaps I could cut my price. We'll find the money somehow, Signor, Nancy promised. Then she and Grace thanked the teacher and followed Allison outside. At the Drew home that evening, there were mixed emotions on everyone's part. Hannah Gruen had taken a great fancy to the Hoover sisters, and the news of Allison's talent had thrilled her, as well as the girls. Conversation at supper was gay and animated. Nancy and Mrs. Gruen drove the sisters to their farm, and on parting, Nancy again promised to do all she could to help find a will from which the girls might possibly benefit. But figuring out how to do this became a problem that seemed insurmountable to Nancy. Told you I can't read words. At breakfast the following day, Mr. Drew suggested, Nancy, perhaps you'd give your mind a little rest from the Crowley matter, and inspiration about the case might come to you. His daughter smiled. Good idea, Dad. I think I'll take a walk in the fresh air and clear the cobwebs from my brain. As soon as she finished eating, Nancy set out at a brisk pace. So there is the girls in Signor I'm not going to try to say his name again. She headed for River Heights' attractive park to view the display of roses, which was always very beautiful. She had gone only a short distance along one of the paths when she caught sight of Isabel and Ada Topham. Oh my gosh. Seated on a bench not far ahead. They're the last people in the world I want to see right now, Nancy thought. They'll probably say something mean to me, and I'll lose my temper. When I think how Grace and Allison and the Turners could use just 1/10 of the Crowley money, which the Tophams are going to inherit, I could just burst. Nancy had paused, wondering whether she should turn back. No, she told herself. I'll go on to see the roses. I'll take the path back of the Tophams, and they won't notice me. Nancy made her way along quietly, with no intention of eavesdropping on the two girls, but suddenly 2 words of their conversation came to her ears, bringing Nancy to an involuntary halt. She had distinctly heard Isabel say, the will. In a flash, Nancy's detective instincts were aroused, and her heart pounded excitedly. It must be Josiah Crowley's will they're talking about, she reasoned. That was the end of chapter 6. Next time, which will be next Wednesday, I will be doing chapters 7 and 8. Alright, so what was I gonna say? Alright. Oh my gosh, I am so tired, I can't even think. Alright. Yeah, so that does it for this video. Comment, like, subscribe, share, suggest future video ideas, and I will see you all in the next video, either next week or I might do a singing video this weekend. I haven't decided yet. Alright, love you, Dream Chasers.